Let's dive right into a fascinating thought experiment today where we're going to try and calculate the exact hard monetary value of a spiritual title. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a highly unique piece of writing by an author named Shu Feng, titled, "Let's Calculate the Value of One Crown of Chenyuan's Celestial Name." What we have here is a text that does something you really don't see every day. It takes abstract spiritual concepts of human fulfillment and attempts to slap a literal dollar sign on them. We're going to walk through the author's exact logic, step by step, to see exactly how this mathematical philosophy actually unfolds.
So here's the central mystery we are unraveling. How in the world do you assign a real dollar amount to membership in a utopian community? How do you price a name? Specifically, this source asks us to evaluate the title of One Crown of Chanyuan Celestial, which signifies membership in a group called the Lifechanyuan. Now, before we can just punch numbers into a calculator, the author insists we have to take a major step back and look at the absolute foundation of how human beings measure worth in the first place.
That brings us to part one: what is value, or the subjectivity of wealth? The author kicks things off with a pretty fundamental premise. Human beings value things completely differently depending on their worldview. Value, according to the text, is entirely subjective. It's not a universal constant like gravity. It's a lens. If we're going to understand the math later in this explainer, we really need to grasp the philosophy first. I mean, think about it. While some people see money as absolutely essential for life, others consider it completely worthless. Some view friendship as a tactical tool for personal gain, while others see it as true, irreplaceable spiritual wealth. Even something as basic as labor. Is it a joyful source of happiness, or just a grim, exhausting means of survival? The text points out that some even belittle the value of labor entirely. By highlighting these massive contrasts, the source is basically prepping us for a valuation that steps way outside of traditional Wall Street economics.
Moving on to part two, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is essentially our formula for value.
To actually calculate this value, the text pulls in a super famous psychological framework. The author asks, what is the actual purpose of a person's lifelong efforts? To answer that, the text turns to the renowned American psychologist Abraham Maslow. Following the author's logic, utilizing Maslow's hierarchy, we basically spend our entire lives striving to climb these 5 specific steps. The premise is that everything we do, every job we take, every connection we make is just an attempt to scale this pyramid, from the basic physiological needs at the absolute bottom all the way up through safety, social connection, esteem, and finally, self-actualization at the very peak. To figure out what a spiritual title is worth, the author argues we have to measure how effectively it helps a person climb these exact steps.
Let's look at the baseline. The text posits that most people struggle to fulfill even the foundational levels of this pyramid. Physiological needs are the bare minimum: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, and according to the source, even sexual life. Right above that sits safety. We're talking job security, personal safety, stability, and protection from diseases and disasters. The author argues that a vast majority of humanity spends their entire existence just trying to lock down these bottom 2 tiers, never quite securing a stable, worry-free future.
Now, if you do manage to make it further up the hierarchy, the author explains we start seeking out accomplishment and recognition. Once you aren't stressing about your next meal or keeping the lights on, your social needs kick in. You want care and support from family, friends, and colleagues. And right above that is the esteem level. This is where the drive for wealth, status, and power really takes over. According to the text, we crave self-respect and a good reputation, which is heavily driven by this deep desire to avoid being disregarded or underestimated by society.
And then we reach the absolute peak: self-actualization. This final stage represents the ultimate purpose of all those lifelong efforts. The source describes this as fully unleashing your potential, striving for ultimate perfection, and experiencing the highest state of beauty in life. Interestingly, the author explicitly adds a spiritual twist to Maslow's completely secular framework here, stating that this peak also involves the desire to, quote, elevate oneself into a celestial being.
Which brings us to part 3, the cost of fulfillment, where we establish our baseline.
So who actually scales this whole pyramid from a worldly perspective? If climbing it is the ultimate goal of human life, how many people actually make it to the summit? Well, the source argues that only the extreme elite manage to truly satisfy all 5 needs. From a purely worldly point of view, the text claims it takes the staggering success of a president, a billionaire, or a Nobel Prize winner to genuinely say everything has been completely fulfilled. They have the ultimate security, the ultimate esteem, and the ultimate platform for that self-actualization. And here is where the math really kicks in. The author establishes our baseline variable, estimating that it takes at least $100 million of effort to acquire these elite titles and the fulfillment that comes with them. The text basically asks, how much money does it take to purchase the title of president, billionaire, or Nobel Prize laureate? The author concludes it is entirely reasonable to assume it requires a minimum of $100 million. So, following this logic, full fulfillment across all 5 levels of Maslow's hierarchy has a real-world market price. And that price tag? $100 million.
Moving to Part 4, the Lifechanyuan second home. Let's call this the Chanyuan variable. Now we introduce the specific variable we're trying to value, a society known as the Lifechanyuan second home. Having established that total secular fulfillment costs roughly $100 million, the author shifts focus to the members of this specific community, referred to as the kingdom of the greatest creator. Let's see how they stack up against the hierarchy. The text claims members here effortlessly achieve those base and social needs. They live in a loving atmosphere where people never quarrel, and apparently doors don't even need to be locked. Their physiological needs are fully satisfied. They have job security, low exposure to disease, but what's really wild is how the source describes their social and esteem needs. It portrays this completely harmonious community of sincere people sharing meals and workspaces, claiming no one keeps lost articles and there are absolutely no personal conflicts. So their social and esteem needs are entirely fulfilled, completely bypassing the pursuit of traditional wealth or power.
But what about the top of the pyramid? The source asserts that Chanyuan celestials fully achieve self-actualization by living freely and independently in a beautiful, serene environment. The text is super clear about this. There's zero supervision, no one is managing them. But it actually goes way beyond just a peaceful earthly life. The author introduces this massive cosmic scale to their self-actualization, claiming they have the prospect of reaching the 1,000-year world, the 10,000-year world, and the Elysium celestial island continents. Out in these environments surrounded by truth, goodness, and beauty, the text claims they continually encounter the absolute peak experiences of life.
To hammer this home, the author actually drops a quote from the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche to emphasize that members develop a completely independent consciousness and an integrated personality. By quoting Nietzsche's famous directive to become who you are, the text argues that life in this community isn't just about passively existing in peace. It's about active, ultimate self-discovery. The claim is that these members don't just find themselves. They fully realize themselves in a way most ordinary people just never do.
All right, let's bring it all together. Part 5, the final calculation, the price tag.
Okay, time to run the final numbers. We have our baseline cost of worldly fulfillment, and we have the author's assessment of spiritual fulfillment within this second home. The text concludes that members of this community actually achieve more satisfaction across all 5 human needs than presidents or billionaires do. On one hand, you have secular elites dropping $100 million of effort to secure the top tier of Maslow's pyramid. On the other hand, the author argues that Chanyuan celestials achieve all of that, and perhaps even more given those cosmic prospects we talked about, without needing that massive financial investment. According to the source text, the fulfillment is at least equal, if not greater.
Therefore, following the author's incredibly strict formula, the final valuation of this spiritual title is theoretically greater than $100 million. Because the title guarantees a state of self-actualization and security that would cost an ordinary person $100 million to achieve out in the secular world, the math dictates that the name itself holds that equivalent or greater value. It's absolutely a bold, fascinating way to try and quantify the unquantifiable, using straight economic logic to validate a spiritual lifestyle.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to wrap up this explainer. Based on this whole framework, what price tag would you put on your own ultimate fulfillment? The author, Su Feng, used Maslow's hierarchy to claim a $100 million valuation for a Chanyuan celestial name. But what does your pyramid actually look like? Is your peak of self-actualization tied to a fancy title, a specific dollar amount in the bank, or just a state of mind? It's definitely something worth pondering. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack this highly unique text. Keep questioning the value of things, and keep climbing your own pyramid.